Okay, tēnā koutou. Kia ora, kia ora. We are here live for the special presentation. Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision presents Kupe, Voyaging by the Stars. And it's part of the Doc Edge Documentary Film Festival and the Doc Edge Schools program, which we're here for right now. So I'd like to do a special mihi to the University of Auckland attendees. We have Joshua Sefo Atkins and we have Michelle Burstall. But I'd also like to extend thank yous to Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision and the Ray Foundation, who have made the entire Doc Edge Schools program possible. But I'd also like to thank Alicia Adar, who has been tirelessly supporting the Doc Edge Schools program, and it's her birthday today, so we're going to be like, hey, happy birthday, Harira whānau, yeah, koe, all of that. So yeah, big mihi to you, Alicia, for all of the support this year in interesting times. But also Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, we're very lucky to have with us now Lawrence Wharedo, and afterwards we'll be speaking with Director Peter Ture. But yes, I'd like to tuku aku mihi ki a koe, Lawrence, and hand over to you, pretty much.
Tēnā koe, Matt, thank you very much. Aku iti aku rahi tēnei mihi kaone ke tātou katoa. I rarau mai nei ki roto tēnei rūma upurangi. Ki te mātaki tautoko hoki tēnei paki pūne ka Kupe, Voyaging by the Stars. He mihi kawana ki te hunga mā te rātai ko hipātu ki te pō. Kia koe pāpā he, pāpā mau, pāpā haimona, whaia hera, koutou katoa ko hinga atu. Tēnei te karangatu ki a koutou ki a whakahoki a wairua mai. Ki te tautoko, ki te hāpai, ki te manaki tō tātou kaupapa i tēnei ai. He mea no tēnei kia tātou te hungora, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lawrence Wharedo. I'm a curator at Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, New Zealand's primary archive of film, television and radio. It is with much pleasure that we partner again with Doc Edge to support their program of documentaries, and particularly in this new online environment. I think one of the advantages of the online environment is it's given Doc Edge a bit more of a wider reach than they would have. For instance, we did have a message back from a group in Carmel who shared the whole screening experience of the whole school, and they got a lot of merit and credit out of that and value. So I think that one of the things COVID has provided for Doc Edge is a widening of their market with associated issues, connectability and that sort of stuff. Excuse me. Kupe, Voyaging by the Stars is a visual account and record of the construction and journey of Te Aurere, the double-hulled ocean-going vessel that was created by Heke Nukumai Ngāiwi Puhipi, otherwise known as Hek Busby. Hector's relationship with waka and the culture goes back quite some time. He was responsible for getting Ngātuki Matawhaurua, the large ceremonial wakataua at Waitangi, had sat on the beach basically for 34 years after its initial launch in 1940. His interest in waka and ocean going, besides being a fisherman himself, was seeded back in those days. He spoke to a lot of kaumātua and kuia about waka construction. He had a relationship with the master carver of Ngātuki Matawhaurua, Piri Pautapu. And then Hector, of course, got into building waka himself. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the screening, when, as Matt mentioned, we'll be having the director join us in the room for a short Q&A session afterwards. The documentary takes you from the tree standing in the bush to arriving on the shores at Rarotonga about 18 months later. Originally, the documentary was put out without narration but it was put together for television. And as Pitatude says, the gods of television required a narration to that. So the version that we'll be engaging with this afternoon is the narrated version. And look, really, I think the best thing for us to do is just to get into it. You're not here to listen to me rabbit on. We'll just get into the screen proper. If you go to your chat function, there is a link there for you to follow that will take you into the room. The screening is about 59 minutes or something like that. And if you care to join us back in the room here after the screening, as I said, we'll have Pitatude, the director, and we can enjoy a bit of a Q&A, and there is also, if you use the chat function to ask any questions, we'll be able to pick those up. So, kia ora mai tātou katoa. I'll ask Alicia and Matt to hit the go button. If you click over to the chat box, engage there. We'll see you back here in about an hour or so. Kia ora tātou. We're very fortunate to have the documentary director join us, Pitatude. Tēnā koe kara.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Pita, we are using the chat function to field questions as well. So students, if questions do come to mind, please use the chat function, and we'll do our best. We'll endeavour to pick those questions up and answer them as a course of the Q&A session that we're about to have. Pita, as I said, we do have a question already lined up, and the question is, was Te Aurere left in Rarotonga, or was it sailed back to Aotearoa?
Kia ora. Good question. It was sailed home. I didn't return on the waka. I flew back, courtesy of Air New Zealand. Thank you. But really it was because I had a film to finish, and so I couldn't really partake in that. But there's no shortage of people, keen volunteers willing to go on such a voyage, so they weren't short-staffed at all. The waka has done several voyages, several epic voyages throughout the Pacific since then. We have to remember I made this film more than 30 years ago, and in those ensuing years, the interest and the number of waka have grown exponentially. There are dozens of ocean voyaging waka in the Pacific now, birthed in all over the islands, and you know, with exchanges of crew and people, just like we had on the maiden voyage with from the Marianas, from Satawal, from Hawaii, and from Aotearoa today too. And there are many of our young people who are experiencing those voyages and the way it is influencing their professions and such. I mean, one I would mention is Gabrielle Hinden, who's got an exhibition coming up somewhere soon, but she studied in Hawaii the tapa designs, how they relate to celestial cognizance and navigation and such, and so her art reflects that. And so people have taken into much deeper dimensions our perceptions through art, through music. There's another PhD student in Brisbane who is Tongan, who has made the associations of the musical intonations of traditional waiata and such to the tapa designs, and just linking up all of these ways in which we maintain this knowledge in a culture that didn't have the written word or cell phones. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really intrigues me about the whole project is the revival of traditional arts and knowledge, and you know, we're lucky that we're able to tap into the existing knowledge bases that were there already, and to increase our own knowledge. Can you share with us a bit more about that whole traditional knowledge sharing through the Pacific?
Well, my perceptions of it started in 1980 at the South Pacific Arts Festival, which had been going a few years. It's every 3 years, I think, or every 4 years. The first one was in Rotorua, And so it pulls together all of the artists and traditional practitioners from throughout the Pacific. Now, the way that festival has grown mean it's the destination of voyagers for waka from all over the Pacific. And that's what it was back then when Te Aurere arrived in Rarotonga. And that has continued. And in that, it's created the synergy of perception that links all of our art forms together. One of the things that demonstrates is that all of us throughout the Pacific have kept something special and unique. And when we join all of those things together, we get the fabric of our comprehension of science, of mathematics, and how that worked in our existence in the Pacific as the world's first navigators.
We have another question coming. Why was the journey important at the time the film was made in the 1990s?
The journey was important way before then, and there'd been a few other goes at it. And the one that made the most distance would be the Hawaii Nui, which never voyaged from here. It was shipped unfinished to Tahiti and then made the return voyage back from Tahiti. And there was a Hawaii Nui. Greg Whakataka Brightwell was the skipper on that. Francis Cowan was the navigator, Tahitian. And so it had been in the dreams of young men and old men alike for decades before that, possibly women as well, but I never knew any women who were sort of obsessed with waka back in the 70s anyway. So from my knowledge in the 70s, but then we were taught things from people who were, 20 years older than us, who had carried those ideas as well. So I'd have to say that the dream has always stayed there somewhere. And it became manifest in the late 70s with the Hawaii Nui first, and then with Te Aurere making the maiden voyage from Rarotonga, and from Aotearoa to Rarotonga, probably the first in 300 odd years. And so there was something we needed to do in terms of reclaiming our station on the ocean, reclaiming our status on the sea as voyagers, because really we were a bunch of landlubbers who were green, who needed a good hiding and needed to bring ourselves up to speed, not through comfort, but through a good test. And we got it.
We have another question coming in. An early documentary about Pacific navigation was Konchiki with Thor Heyerdahl. Was there any inspiration drawn from that movie to the making of this one?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question and interesting. You should ask that. No, not at all. And in fact, really, my thing is to dispel the mythology and the illusions created by documentaries like that and bring it back out of supposed academic mystery into the simple realities of everything is still recorded in our collective waiata art forms, designs and such. And we're growing in our understanding of how to interpret that knowledge back into practical reality. So, yeah, Thor's film, I was really counter that. I wanted to present our view of it, but ourselves, that didn't ask any silly questions about how we navigated the Pacific and such, but really just point to where the answers to those things lie and not leave them as mysteries. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, though, I did work in Rapa Nui on another waka project that was from a protege of Thor Heyerdahl's, who made a papyrus waka on Rapa Nui, which he intended to sail back through the Pacific to Aotearoa. And the thing about the papyrus waka, or the opal waka, is that they have a use-by date, and so you have to use them relatively quickly, and then they start sinking. We have a tradition of them in the Chathams. They have a tradition of them in Rapa Nui and they have a tradition of them in Egypt. And so, in a way, Thor Heyerdahl was very much associating those links. He never made it here. And that waka, which was based on petrographs and a Spanish-led exhibition, it would be referred to. It sunk. It only got about 120 miles before, and an American yacht called Stray Dog picked them all up. So that was unsuccessful, that one. So there are dangers in the process. You know, they were lucky to get picked up, really. That part of the ocean isn't really that busy. But anyway, yeah.
Another question, and I think it's rather interesting. What role do women have in waka building and voyaging? And the crew in the film are all male. Is this traditional?
Gosh, that's such a good question. It can't be tradition that only men went on waka. What sort of a party is that? Our genealogies demonstrate that lots of women came. You know, we came with families. When Kupe visited, his wife and his daughters were with him. So, yeah, no, it's a silly idea. And I think it's part of our colonization that we strip from most of our narratives any mention of the status of women, any mention of the importance of women and those rituals and those practices where we acknowledge the transitions of different parts of the process. And so, again, that is something we have to reinstate. We have to dismantle our colonization and our perception with those things, and we have to re-empower the station of women within every component of voyaging, I believe.
Right.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
The other thing that intrigues me about it is that this is a meeting of traditional knowledge, mātauranga, meeting scholarship or scientific data. And it's demonstrated right the way through, from the very beginning, the selection of the tree, through to them arriving on the shore. Can you talk just a little bit about the differences that you'd notice, particularly when you're on the water, in traditional knowledge butting its head up against modern technology?
I think the thing is, that's going to happen to you every hour, probably every minute, but every decision you make on the ocean, if you're on a waka, you're going to be wrestling with that. It's going to be inside your own head, inside your own actions, your behavior, your expectations. And then it's going to affect how everybody communicates with each other and what you anchor your faith in. Because, you know, out on the ocean, you kind of need a little bit of faith. I mean, sailors probably take it for granted, but you got to have some faith there. And if you haven't got faith, if you've got a whole lot of other dependencies in your head, and we do have natural dependencies on technology today. That's part of our world. We haven't really grown up learning how to trust nature, how to read nature, how to be with nature, how to accept nature. We either protect ourselves from it or we pretend it isn't there or do something else. So it's all of those things. You're going to get close to that. Now, that was one thing in this voyage I had an opportunity to demonstrate that conflict with Mo Piailong, you know, on a fine sunny day, sailing along and sitting us down on the waka and placing pebbles where Rarotonga Aotearoa was, and how we were sailing straight towards our destination on a fair wind. But he said, looking at the ripples on the wave, there was another wind coming. It was being telegraphed by these tiny ripples racing across the top of the other waves. And he said that means a big wind is coming straight towards us. And we need to use this wind to take ourselves south to get out of the way of that wind, let it through, and then we can bring ourselves back onto course and we'll carry on. Well, Kiri Kiri radios reported the time, later apologised for as being inaccurate, but it stated clearly there was no such wind or storm coming. And so, given the choice of whether to believe the technology or to listen to an old man from Satawal with a few pebbles on the deck, who was looking at waves. And, you know, I spent a lot of time looking at waves. I can't read waves. I can't read them like that. I think it takes probably 3 generations of sitting on the water doing that to get there. But he could read them, but we didn't really trust him. And so we went with the weather report, and we sailed straight smack bang into that big wind, and we got a hiding, and we deserved it. Yeah, and eventually we kind of worked out, well, maybe he was right, and we went south, and we got out of the way of the wind, and things eased up, and then we got back on course. So we were late, of course. It means it took us a few more days than it should have. But one thing about getting there late means that the welcome is only for you. So that's always nice too.
Another question coming in the documentary, Waiata often features. Is Waiata particularly relevant for Māori storytelling?
Yeah, I think so. For all the reasons, you know, romantics talk about song and music in any culture and language. You know, it's the food of love. And in any story you tell, the best stories are always love stories. And they don't have to be just about people. I mean, Heck loved trees. He loved those trees. He had a love affair with that wood. Every time he touched it, it was a caress. You know, so yeah, songs really, you can talk about it. And I hate having narration over anything. I like listening to people singing, sharing words or conversation. So I try and keep narration out of my documentaries, but totally.
Because I did, before you came to the session, I did mention that that this is a narrated version, and that your preferred is the non-narrated one. Look, I want to touch on something that Paul and Noel said during the film, and that was, you know, we were talking about it. The waka had been built; it was on the water, and he says that the journey has only just begun. Can you expand a little bit more on that for us?
Oh, that was when we sighted land. So we went through the storm. We got a hiding. We're all wet for days. And then Mo, who was sitting in his chair where he sat up the back on the left-hand corner there, he just had a little bit of a smile on his face. And it was a little while after that someone saw land, the outline of land in the cloud, that one line in the row of clouds that didn't move when the clouds moved, and it was land. And he just laughed, and I don't know how long he'd already known about it, but anyway, so we saw land, and so we all cheered and we all got excited. And then Paulie turns around and said, "Oh well, been there, done it. What's next?" Or you quoted him better just then. That's when he said that line, yeah. And it was that feeling, once you, even though you got a hiding, you're wet, everything like that, once you've actually accepted it, you've cleared your mind, you've embraced the situation you're in. You're part of the ocean. You live and breathe the ocean. You're there. You can stand on it, stand with it, go wherever it takes you. And then you see land. It's like, it's so disappointing. It's so, you know, it's so like, oh no, it's over now. That was it already. Oh, can we go somewhere else? You know, so you kind of feel like that. Is my camera still on?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. Can you point there?
Okay.
I
don't think it's me anyway.
Let's blame the gods of technology.
Yeah.
There's an interesting part there, particularly where Jack was talking about this being an opportunity to disprove the whole drift theory.
Yes, well, and the drift theory is a reference to me of the drift theory, the lost at sea theory, the whatever they are. There's a range of them. That it was purely accidental that we got here, and it's good that it's driven people to examine. how that might have happened. The work of James Sears, just working out that it wasn't which way the wind blew that we went, it was which way or when it blew back again that we knew we'd be able to sail out for 3 or 4 days and have a look, and there'd be a wind to bring us home. And so based on that, we start to see a different pattern of how we explored the Pacific. And we start to learn all of those sorts of things. And as we actually do it, once we take our feet onto those coral atolls, those islands, we start sharing our language, our song, our experience. I mean, we'd start to see it ourselves. We know it because we live it. And so it's not about theories, it's about experience and what we discover through that experience. So there are rich things still to discover everywhere. We place stones, as humanity did everywhere. They place stones to get with cognizance of the cycles of the moon, the 38-year cycles, the cycles of Venus, the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. To get those things, we needed stones in the earth, and we did that like every culture did, and we did that throughout the Pacific. And throughout the Pacific, we have the range of latitudes that tells its own story within that.
Now, the whole selection of the crew and the team building exercises. I imagine, though, that some of those relationships may have been tested, particularly when you were weathering the storm. How was morale on board?
Well, it was pretty good, really. There were some people who shone, and there were people who hadn't been on a waka voyage before, and they held people up when they started to slip.
Wow.
Without doing much, without making a fuss about it, without looking like they were doing anything, they held people up. And capturing that was a bit tough. It's hard filming in a storm, and people get pissed off with you if you're just standing there with the camera all the time. But yeah, it was those things, and that really brings out character, in people. And so as long as that's there, weathering a storm or anything like that was good. But morale didn't really fade, but we all had our own demons to fight of how we were colonized, to how we could think, what we could see, what we could believe in.
Just one final question, Kata, and it's to do with the whole, I guess, excitement, trepidation about going into the journey. How much of that existed for you and other crew members?
Well, I'm Tainui. I went to Taupiri and did my karakia, and I got a tohu when I was there. And just in a short version, it was just a shark, and it made me feel like I had nothing to fear. So I felt like I was okay. I don't know about anybody else. I don't know if the shark was going to eat them or whatever, but in my interpretation, I had a guardian. I was okay. Number one first. Yeah, but we all found our own way there, and you could see it would test people as you would expect it to. But for myself, I had my guardian there, so I was set. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also very aware they heightened emotions at both departure from Aotearoa and arrival in Rarotonga. Huge outpourings of emotion. And Jack sort of spoke about he'd never done this before, joked about the size of the waves and all that sort of stuff. There's also what appeared to be a real sense of relief when the waka arrived in Rarotonga. Well, ko tai te wā.
It was a relief. A small boat is a small boat, and that many people on a small boat, you start to sort of thinking what it'd be like talking to someone else. So, I mean, that was definitely there.
Yeah.
And, you know, as soon as you came face to face with those people, whoever was in the front row was another human being, you know, you kind of wanted to really, you know, just touch, be close and stuff, and really, we were kind of swallowed by that crowd and taken to food and celebration and stuff like that. So it was a pretty enchanting evening to spend on Rarotonga, let me put it that way.
And just reflecting on when Waikinui arrived, I was one of the first reporters to be able to interview the crew. And so what you guys asked when you got here, and they said a beer, a cigarette, and a feed in that order. So it's just one of the things, I guess, that you talk about the isolation at sea. E hoa pita taku hoa ko tai te wā mata ki te kapi tēnei kōrero. Do you have any last words that you'd like to leave with the audience?
All these films are free to view on NZ On Screen. This one, I made another one about Wakatoa being built in 1990. I made another one on on nuclear testing in the Pacific. I don't just blame the French. I think we were involved as well. But yeah, and there's lots of other good stuff to watch there as well. Anyway, I made this film years ago. So to all the young people out there, get out there, hit it, do it, hit it hard. Show us what's happening today. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Peter. Thank you very much for that. Look, just before we close the session, there are a number of acknowledgements I'd like to make. First of all, kia koe, Peter. E kara tēnei te mihi kawana kia koe. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about our craft and storytelling in documentary form. Also to Doc Edge for making this opportunity available, and so your taonga can be seen and engaged with again, and also their innovation about putting the festival online and just has increased their reach. I'd also like to thank the Ray Foundation for financing and making the whole kaupapa available to us. And just one more acknowledgement to the team that support me here at Ngā Taonga, the technicians, fellow curators and managers who free me up and give me the time to come away from my desk and engage with audiences. Pea no tātou mā tēnei mihi kawana ki tātou katoa, i te timatanga i karangahi atu au ki ngā tini aitua. Nā reire i nā enei ka tika, me mihi atu ki a rātau, ki te tangi ki a rātau, ki te mea ngātu me hoki koutou ki tua paira. Whakahoki a koutou ki roto o te waihingaro, mā koutou anō ki a hakarere he kāinga tūturu mo māta mo te tangata. Apiti hono tātai hono, ko koutou te hua wairua ki o koutou, apiti hono tātai hono, ko tātou te hunga tēnei mi kawana ki a tātou katoa. It's been a very much pleasure and privilege for Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision to support Doc Edge programs. So I'd just like to sign off by saying thank you all very much. Kia ora mai rā tātou katoa, noho ora mai a koutou kāinga maha. Huri no te motu, tēnā koutou katoa.